The Burj Khalifa's 148th floor penthouse sits 555 meters above Dubai's glittering streets, where the air is so thin it requires special pressurization systems, and where the wealthy live so far above the world that they forget ordinary rules apply to them. On the evening of November 12, 2019, in a residence where Italian marble floors cost more per square foot than most people earn annually, a 26-year-old Filipina domestic worker named Maricel Evangelista stood before her employer with trembling hands pressed against her swollen belly and words that would seal her fate. "I'm 3 months pregnant. The child is yours. You promised to take care of me. I want marriage. I want my child to have your name." Sheikh Rashid Al-Mahmoud, 38-year-old heir to a Dubai real estate empire worth an estimated $4.2 billion, stared at the woman who cleaned his home and warmed his bed with an expression that Maricel would later describe to her cousin as completely empty. Like I just told him about broken dishware instead of his own child. Within the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, Dubai's skyline stretched endlessly, a monument to wealth built on sand and the invisible labor of people like Maricel. By midnight, Maricel Evangelista had vanished from the Burj Khalifa penthouse. Her phone went dark. Her social media went silent. Her room in the servants' quarters was cleaned so thoroughly that forensic investigators would later find no trace she'd ever existed there. The pregnancy test she'd shown Sheikh Rashid? Gone. The ultrasound images? Disappeared. The text messages where he'd promised to take care of everything? Deleted from devices on both ends through remote access that money could buy. But Maricel's cousin, Faith Santos, who'd received a panicked voice message at 9:47 p.m. that night, knew something terrible had happened. The message was fragmented, distorted by fear. "Faith, I told him about the baby. He's making phone calls. There are men here now. I think I need to. Static. Please, if something happens, tell my family I." The message cut off. Maricel was never heard from again. How does a pregnant woman vanish from one of the world's most surveilled buildings? What happens when domestic workers in Dubai discover they're carrying the children of men who view them as temporary conveniences rather than human beings? And why does the city that prides itself on luxury and safety become a black hole when foreign workers disappear? Today's case exposes the darkest corners of Dubai's domestic worker industry, where 146,000 women live at the mercy of sponsors who control their visas, their movements, and increasingly, their survival. Maricel Evangelista's story isn't just about one woman's disappearance. It's about a system designed to make certain people disposable, and what happens when disposable people make demands that powerful men can't tolerate. This investigation contains evidence gathered from Maricel's family, testimony from other domestic workers who escaped similar situations, and disturbing documentation of how Dubai's wealthiest families make problems vanish. The Sheikh at the center of this case has never been charged. The case remains officially under investigation for years later. And somewhere in Dubai, in a construction site, a desert grave, or perhaps dissolved in chemicals accessible to men with unlimited resources, Maricel Evangelista's body has never been found. But her voice, captured in that final desperate message, demands to be heard. Maricel Joy Evangelista was born in 1993 in San Fernando, Pampanga, in a region known for producing the Philippines' most sought-after domestic workers, women whose English fluency, work ethic, and desperate economic circumstances made them ideal for export to wealthier nations. Her childhood was defined by absence. Her father abandoned the family when she was 4, her mother worked in Hong Kong as a domestic helper, and Maricel was raised primarily by her grandmother in a house where electricity was rationed and protein was reserved for special occasions. She was the eldest of 3 children, which meant adulthood arrived around age 9 when her grandmother's arthritis made it impossible to manage the household alone. Maricel cooked, cleaned, and mothered her younger siblings while attending public school in shoes held together with wire and uniforms washed so frequently they'd faded to gray. Her teachers recognized her intelligence. She consistently ranked in the top 10 of her class, but intelligence without resources is just another form of poverty in a country where education requires money that families like hers would never possess. At 16, Maricel completed high school and faced the same choice confronting millions of Filipino youth. Find impossible local employment paying 8,000 pesos monthly, roughly $160, or join the 2.3 million overseas Filipino workers sending remittances that kept the entire national economy functioning. Her mother, still working in Hong Kong after 12 years, encouraged her to follow the same path. At least in Hong Kong, Saudi, Dubai, you can save money. Here, you just survive. In 2012, at 19, Maricel enrolled in a caregiver training program run by a recruitment agency in Manila. The 6-month course taught basic nursing skills, housekeeping, childcare, and most importantly, how to anticipate employers' needs before they were spoken. The underlying message was clear: your employers are not just bosses but sponsors who control your legal existence. Their satisfaction determines whether you eat regularly, sleep adequately, or maintain any connection to the family you're supporting. Compliance isn't just professional, it's survival. Maricel excelled at the training with the same determination she'd applied to everything in her difficult life. She learned to cook continental cuisine despite having never tasted most ingredients. She practiced English pronunciation until her Pampanga accent softened into something more palatable to foreign ears. She studied the unwritten rules of domestic work in the Gulf states. Never make eye contact with male employers unless directly addressed. Never refuse any task regardless of how it violated your contract. Never complain about working conditions because deportation and blacklisting happen to women who cause problems. Her first placement in 2013 was Kuwait, working for a family of 6 as their live-in maid. The contract promised 150 Kuwaiti dinars monthly, roughly $500, accommodation, food, and weekly day off. The reality was 18-hour workdays, no days off, verbal abuse from the wife who resented her presence, and salary payments that came irregularly or not at all. After 7 months, Maricel violated the cardinal rule of domestic work. She ran away. The runaway maid designation made her unemployable in Kuwait, but she managed to contact a different agency that specialized in placing workers who'd escaped bad situations. They offered her a position in Dubai with significantly better terms: 2,500 UAE dirhams monthly, $680, proper accommodation, and an employer from a prominent Emirati family known for treating staff relatively well. In March 2014, at 21 years old, Maricel arrived in Dubai carrying one suitcase and dreams recalibrated by experience. She no longer fantasized about saving enough to open a small business back home. Her ambitions had been reduced to more immediate survival. Send money to support her siblings' education, pay for her grandmother's medical expenses, accumulate enough savings to eventually return home with dignity rather than failure. The Al-Mahmouds family's Burj Khalifa penthouse exceeded anything Maricel had imagined. The residence occupied the entire 148th floor, nearly 12,000 square feet of luxury that felt more like a museum than a home. Calacatta marble imported from Italy covered floors that were heated to precise temperatures. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of a city that looked like a circuit board of light and ambition. Custom furniture from European designers sat in rooms so vast that conversations echoed. The kitchen contained appliances that cost more than Maricel would earn in 5 years. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mahmoud was the family's second son, living in the penthouse while managing his father's real estate holdings. His older brother handled the family's construction businesses. His younger brother managed their hospitality investments, and Rashid oversaw the property portfolio that included dozens of buildings across Dubai Marina, downtown, and Palm Jumeirah. On paper, he was a businessman. In reality, he was a wealthy man whose inherited fortune required only occasional attention, leaving vast stretches of time for pursuits that boredom and entitlement made dangerous. The penthouse staff consisted of 5 people. A British butler who managed household operations, a Lebanese chef who prepared meals, a Syrian driver, and 2 Filipina housekeepers. Maricel and an older woman named Dalise who'd worked for the family for 6 years. The hierarchy was explicit. The butler received the highest salary and most respect, the chef occupied middle position, and the domestic workers existed at the bottom, invisible until needed. Maricel's duties were comprehensive: cleaning the penthouse's 12 rooms daily, doing laundry for Sheikh Rashid and occasional family visitors, preparing light meals when the chef was off duty, and maintaining the immaculate presentation that wealth demanded. The work was exhausting but manageable compared to Kuwait. She had her own small room in the servants' quarters, ate regularly, and received her salary on time. Most importantly, She could send 2,000 dirhams home monthly, money that transformed her family's circumstances incrementally but genuinely. For the first 18 months, Maricel maintained perfect professional boundaries. She addressed Sheikh Rashid as Sir and avoided situations where they'd be alone. She'd learned in Kuwait that wealthy men viewed domestic workers as available for whatever services they desired, and survival meant making yourself small, invisible, undesirable. But Sheikh Rashid noticed her anyway, not because she was trying to attract attention, but because predators notice vulnerability regardless of how carefully prey tries to hide. The shift began subtly in October 2015, approximately 18 months after Maricel's arrival. Sheikh Rashid started requesting that Maricel specifically serve his meals, clean his private quarters, bring him things when other staff were readily available. The attention felt dangerous, but Dallasay, the senior housekeeper, provided grim counsel during one of their rare private conversations. "He's choosing you," Dallasay said flatly while they folded laundry in the servants' quarters. "This happens. You have choices, but they're all bad. Refuse directly and he'll fire you, blacklist you, maybe have you deported with criminal charges so you can't work anywhere. Accept and you become his kept woman, better treatment, more money, but you lose yourself. Or you can try to manage it carefully, give just enough to keep your job but not so much that you lose control." "What did you do?" Maricel asked. "I'm old enough that he doesn't want me that way," Dallasay replied with bitter humor. "But I watched this happen to 3 girls before you. One got pregnant and disappeared. Family was told she ran away with a boyfriend, but none of us believed it. Another accepted the situation, became his mistress, got upgraded accommodation and salary, but eventually he tired of her and sent her back to Philippines with good reference and hush money. The third refused, and he destroyed her. False theft accusations, police detention, deportation with criminal record. The message was clear. There were no good choices, only different types of damage. Sheikh Rashid's pursuit escalated through tactics refined by generations of wealthy men seeking to control women in their employ. He started with gifts, expensive chocolates from Belgium, perfume from France, designer scarves that cost more than Maricel's monthly salary. Each gift came with the implicit understanding: these are investments expecting returns. Then came the financial manipulation. In December 2015, when Maricel mentioned her grandmother needed expensive medical treatment for diabetes complications, Sheikh Rashid offered to cover the entire cost. "Consider it a bonus for excellent work," he said, handing her an envelope containing 20,000 dirhams, 8 months of her regular salary. Maricel tried to refuse, instinctively recognizing the trap. But her grandmother needed the medication or she'd lose her remaining foot to amputation. Her family was desperate. She accepted the money, and with it, the unspoken debt that Sheikh Rashid would eventually collect. The first physical contact came in January 2016, during late evening when most staff had retired to their quarters. Sheikh Rashid called Maricel to his private study, ostensibly to discuss household scheduling. She arrived to find him drinking whiskey despite his family's public Islamic conservatism, the city lights behind him making his silhouette seem larger than his actual frame. "You've been with us for almost 2 years, he said, not looking at her directly. "Are you happy here?" "Yes, sir. Very grateful for the opportunity. You're different from other domestic workers. Educated, intelligent, beautiful." The last word hung in the air like a threat disguised as compliment. "Thank you, sir," Maricel said carefully, maintaining position near the door. "I notice you don't have a boyfriend. Young woman like you, that seems unusual." "I'm focused on supporting my family, sir. No time for relationships." He moved closer, his approach deliberate. "That's admirable. But lonely, I think. You deserve someone who appreciates you. Someone who can take care of you the way you take care of others." When his hand touched her shoulder, Maricel froze. Every survival instinct screamed at her to pull away, but Dallasay's warning echoed louder. Refuse directly and lose everything. So she stood rigidly while his hand moved from her shoulder to her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline with possessive gentleness that felt more threatening than outright aggression. "You're trembling," he noted with what might have been satisfaction. "Don't be frightened. I just want to make you feel special. You do understand that I could make your life very easy, don't you? Or very difficult. The choice is yours, Maricel. Always yours. The fiction of choice while holding absolute power, the predator's favorite lie. That night marked the beginning of what Sheikh Rashid would call a relationship, and what Maricel experienced as systematized rape disguised as romance. She didn't fight when he kissed her, when he led her to his bedroom, when he removed clothing she'd worn for modesty and protection. She performed compliance because survival demanded it, because her family's welfare depended on the salary she sent home, because deportation meant returning to poverty more devastating than whatever this cost her psychologically. The relationship followed patterns that thousands of domestic workers experience annually across the Gulf states. Sheikh Rashid established rules. Maricel would come to his quarters when summoned, usually late evening after other staff retired. She would be available for whatever he desired, sometimes sex, sometimes just companionship, sometimes serving as audience for his complaints about business pressures and family expectations. She would maintain complete discretion, never mentioning their relationship to other staff or her family in the Philippines. In exchange, her salary increased to 4,500 dirhams monthly. Her room was upgraded to better quarters. She received gifts, jewelry, clothes, electronics, that marked her as favored but also owned. Most significantly, Sheikh Rashid's lawyer helped process citizenship papers for her younger siblings, securing their education and future in ways Maricel's ordinary salary never could have achieved. This was the devil's bargain that millions of domestic workers negotiate. Trade your body and dignity for your family's survival. Accept being used by men who view you as commodity rather than person. Smile while being violated because the alternative is destitution for everyone you love. Maricel told herself she was making a sacrifice, being strong, doing what was necessary. She told herself it wasn't really prostitution because there was only one client. She told herself she could endure this temporarily, save aggressively, eventually escape with enough money to justify the psychological cost. What she didn't anticipate was that bodies keep score even when minds try to disassociate. And sometimes, bodies create consequences that can't be hidden or managed through willpower and strategic compliance. In August 2019, after 3.5 years of being Sheikh Rashid's domestic worker by day and mistress by night, Maricel missed her period. The realization came with a terror so profound that she vomited immediately, not from morning sickness, but from understanding that her carefully managed survival strategy had just collapsed entirely. She bought 3 pregnancy tests from a pharmacy in Dubai Marina, traveling on her rare day off and paying cash to avoid any electronic trail. All 3 tests returned the same verdict: positive. She was pregnant with Sheikh Rashid's child, a complication that transformed her from manageable problem into existential threat to his reputation, his family standing, his marriage prospects with the Emirati woman his family was negotiating with for an advantageous union. Maricel's first instinct was abortion. Dubai's laws prohibited it except in cases of threat to mother's life, but she knew underground networks existed. Filipino nurses who performed procedures secretly, doctors who could be bribed, medical tourism to nearby countries where termination was accessible. She researched frantically during her limited internet access, discovering that an abortion in Thailand or India would cost approximately 15,000 dirhams. Money she didn't possess after sending most of her income to family. She could ask Sheikh Rashid for the money. But revealing the pregnancy meant revealing the problem, and Maricel had witnessed how powerful men solved problems involving inconvenient women. Dalice's story about the previous maid who got pregnant and disappeared haunted her calculations. For 3 weeks, Maricel carried the secret like a bomb ticking toward detonation. She performed her dual roles, domestic worker and sexual partner, while her body changed in ways that would soon become impossible to hide. Nausea disrupted her morning cleaning routine. Fatigue made evening summons to Sheikh Rashid's quarters increasingly difficult to endure. Her breasts swelled painfully beneath her uniform. The decision to tell Sheikh Rashid came not from courage but from running out of alternatives. By late September, she was approaching 11 weeks pregnant. Abortion was becoming medically riskier. Her body's changes would soon be visible to other staff. The secret she carried was becoming too large to conceal. She chose November 12, 2019 deliberately. Sheikh Rashid's father was traveling in Europe, his brothers occupied with their own business concerns, and the penthouse would be relatively empty, just the essential staff and Rashid himself. If the conversation went badly, fewer witnesses meant less complication for whatever needed to happen next. Maricel prepared carefully. She documented everything. Screenshots of text messages where Sheikh Rashid had called her endearing names in Arabic, photos of gifts he'd given her, a detailed written account of when their sexual relationship had begun and how frequently it occurred. She uploaded copies to cloud storage accessible by her cousin Faith in the Philippines. She recorded a voice message explaining her situation, set to auto-send to Faith if Maricel didn't cancel the timer by midnight. The precautions felt simultaneously paranoid and insufficient. She was a domestic worker with no legal standing confronting a man whose family could mobilize resources she couldn't even imagine. But the child growing inside her was half hers, and some maternal instinct insisted that this child deserved acknowledgement, legitimacy, protection from the poverty that had defined Maricel's own life. At 8 p.m. on November 12th, after the chef had left and the butler had retired to his quarters, Maricel knocked on Sheikh Rashid's study door with hands pressed against her lower abdomen where a tiny human was forming from their encounters. "Come in," he called, his tone suggesting he expected this to be another ordinary evening where she'd serve whatever purpose he required. She entered to find him at his desk, reviewing documents on dual monitors that displayed enough wealth in real estate holdings to feed every poor family in the Philippines for generations. The disparity between his world and hers had never felt more stark. "Sir, I need to speak with you. It's important." Something in her voice made him look up, his expression shifting from distracted to attentive. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." She delivered the words simply, without preamble or softening. 3 months. The child is yours. I've been only with you. No one else has touched me. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though it lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Sheikh Rashid's face cycled through emotions. Shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally, something cold that made Maricel's survival instincts scream warnings. "You're certain?" "I have tests. An ultrasound from a clinic. It's dated 2 weeks ago." She pulled the folded papers from her pocket, placing them on his desk with trembling hands. He studied the documents, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully modulated. "This is unfortunate, but manageable. I'll arrange for a procedure. There are doctors who can handle this discreetly. The cost will be covered, naturally. We'll schedule it for your next day off." "I don't want an abortion," Maricel said, the words emerging stronger than she'd anticipated. "I want to keep the baby. I want marriage, or at least acknowledgement, support. Your name for my child." Now his expression shifted to something between amusement and contempt. "Marriage? Maricel, let's be realistic about our situation. You're my housekeeper." This was a mutually beneficial arrangement, but it was never going to lead to marriage. "I have obligations to my family, expectations to meet." "You're a lovely woman, but you're not." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. "You're not our kind. You're Filipino, poor, a domestic worker. You were temporary entertainment, not potential family." "I didn't ask to become pregnant," Maricel said, feeling anger override fear. "You never used protection. You never asked if I was taking contraception. You just used me whenever you wanted. This baby is half yours. You owe us something." "I owe you nothing beyond what our arrangement provided," Sheikh Rashid said, his tone hardening. "I gave you opportunities, money, helped your family. That was the payment for our relationship. Pregnancy was your responsibility to prevent. Then I'll go to your father. I'll tell him everything." The threat was desperate, foolish, and potentially fatal. Maricel watched Sheikh Rashid's expression transform completely, the mask of civility dropping away to reveal something ruthless beneath. "You'll do no such thing," he said quietly, standing from his desk. "Sit down, Maricel. We need to discuss this carefully." She sat, her body recognizing predator proximity even as her mind tried to process strategy. Sheikh Rashid walked to his bar, poured himself whiskey, then made a phone call in Arabic too rapid for Maricel's limited understanding to follow. She caught key words: problem, requires handling, immediately. When he hung up, his smile was the same one he'd used when first seducing her. Gentle, reassuring, completely false. Here's what's going to happen, he said calmly. You're going to have that abortion. I'll cover all costs, give you a bonus of 50,000 dirhams, and provide an excellent reference for your next position. Alternatively, you can refuse and face consequences. False theft accusations leading to your arrest and deportation. Your family's documentation that I helped secure will be revoked. And you'll leave Dubai with nothing, pregnant and unemployable. You can't do that, Maricel whispered, though she knew he absolutely could. I can do whatever I want, he replied simply. You're a domestic worker making accusations against an Emirati national. Who do you think the authorities will believe? The doorbell rang, an internal chime indicating someone had entered the penthouse using a key code that only security and senior family members possessed. Maricel's terror spiked as heavy footsteps approached the study. 2 men entered. Not police but private security, South African contractors whose muscular builds and cold expressions suggested experience with situations requiring violence. Sheikh Rashid didn't need to explain anything. The men understood their assignment immediately. Wait in her quarters with her while we make arrangements, Sheikh Rashid instructed. Make sure she doesn't contact anyone or try to leave. Maricel's hands moved toward her phone, but one of the security contractors intercepted, taking the device with practiced efficiency. Don't make this difficult, miss. We're just following instructions. As they escorted her from the study, Maricel looked back at Sheikh Rashid. His face showed nothing, no regret, no anger, just cold calculation about eliminating a problem that had evolved from pleasant to problematic. In her small room in the servants' quarters, Maricel sat between the 2 security contractors and understood with absolute clarity that she'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. She'd believed her pregnancy gave her leverage when actually it had marked her for elimination. She'd demanded marriage from a man who viewed her as disposable property. She'd threatened exposure to a family that had unlimited resources for making threats disappear. At 9:47 p.m., one of the contractors stepped into the hallway to take a phone call. The other was distracted by his own device. Maricel saw her opportunity. Her phone had been confiscated, but she'd hidden an older phone in her bedding precisely for emergencies like this. A backup device containing only her cousin Faith's contact information. She grabbed it, ducked into the small bathroom attached to her quarters, and locked the door. Her fingers shook as she dialed, the call going directly to voicemail. She started recording, whispering frantically, Faith, I told him about the baby. He's making phone calls. There are men here now. I think I need to. The bathroom door crashed inward, the cheap lock no match for the security contractor's shoulder. He ripped the phone from her hands, smashing it against the marble floor with force that shattered the screen into dozens of pieces. Please, Maricel begged. Just let me go. I'll leave Dubai tonight. I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home. The contractor's expression suggested he'd heard similar pleas before and found them tiresome rather than moving. That's not how this works, miss. You made threats against an important family. There are protocols for handling that. At 10:23 p.m., Sheikh Rashid entered Maricel's quarters. His presence commanded immediate deference from the security contractors. He carried a bottle of water and a small pill. This will help you stay calm, he said, his voice again adopting that false gentleness. We're arranging your transport to a private medical facility where you'll receive the procedure. Everything will be handled professionally. Afterward, you'll be flown home to the Philippines with compensation for your service. This doesn't have to be traumatic, Maricel. Just cooperate. She looked at the pill and knew instinctively that it wasn't a sedative. It was something final. Women who vanished from Dubai rarely reappeared, and the medical facility Sheikh Rashid described wasn't a clinic. It was a crematorium, a desert grave, a landfill where migrant workers' bodies were discovered occasionally but never identified. I don't want the pill, she said, pressing herself against the wall. It's not optional, Sheikh Rashid replied. His tone remained pleasant, but the security contractors moved closer, their presence making resistance pointless. What happened in the next hour remains unclear because Maricel Evangelista was never seen again. What is known comes from fragmentary evidence, witness accounts from other staff members, and digital forensics that Faith Santos would later provide to investigators. Dallasay, the senior housekeeper, heard raised voices from Maricel's quarters around 10:40 p.m. She heard the sound of someone being sick, violent retching that suggested poisoning rather than pregnancy-related nausea. She heard Maricel crying, pleading in Tagalog, "Please, I don't want to die. My baby doesn't deserve this. Please." Then silence. Around midnight, Dallasay heard the service elevator activating, the freight elevator that staff used for deliveries and garbage removal. She heard the heavy footsteps of multiple people moving something substantial. Through her door's small gap, she glimpsed the security contractors carrying what appeared to be a rolled carpet, the kind of large Persian rugs that decorated the penthouse's main rooms. The bundle was approximately 5 feet long. It sagged in the middle with weight distribution suggesting a human body. By morning, Maricel's quarters had been cleaned with industrial thoroughness. Her belongings were gone. The bathroom where she'd made her desperate phone call showed no trace of the shattered device. Even the bedding had been replaced, the mattress disposed of and substituted with an identical replacement that still had plastic wrapping. When Dallasay asked the butler about Maricel, she was told curtly. She resigned unexpectedly. Returned to the Philippines last night. Family emergency. We'll be hiring her replacement next week. But Maricel never arrived in the Philippines. Her family received no communication. Her bank account showed no final salary payment or the generous compensation Sheikh Rashid had promised. Her passport, which should have been required for international travel, remained in the penthouse's document safe where all domestic workers' papers were held for security purposes. Maricel Evangelista had simply ceased to exist. Faith Santos received her cousin's fragmented voice message at 9:47 p.m. Dubai time, which was 1:47 a.m. Manila time. She woke to the notification, listened with growing horror, and immediately tried calling back. The phone rang unanswered, then went directly to voicemail. Over the next 12 hours, Faith called 97 times. Each call went to voicemail. Text messages showed delivered, but never read. By the following evening, when 24 hours had passed without contact, Faith contacted the Philippine embassy in Dubai. Her report was initially treated as routine. Domestic worker had probably changed positions and forgotten to inform family, or had lost her phone, or had decided to cut contact for personal reasons that were common among overseas workers managing complicated emotional landscapes. But Faith insisted. She provided the voice message as evidence, explaining that Maricel wouldn't have recorded such a message without genuine fear. She explained the pregnancy situation, the employer's identity, the power dynamics that made her cousin vulnerable. The embassy's tone shifted. A domestic worker pregnant by her Emirati employer, making demands, then vanishing, this pattern was familiar and troubling. They initiated formal inquiries with Dubai police, requesting wellness check on Maricel Evangelista at her registered employment address. Dubai police conducted the wellness check on November 15th, 3 days after Maricel's disappearance. They interviewed Sheikh Rashid at the Burj Khalifa penthouse. His account was consistent and convenient. Maricel had resigned abruptly on November 12th, claiming family emergency back in Philippines. He'd paid her outstanding salary, provided bonus for good service, and she'd left that same evening. He had no further information about her whereabouts. She seemed distressed about her family situation. Sheikh Rashid told investigators with practiced concern. I offered to help, but she said she needed to leave immediately. I respected her decision. The police asked about the pregnancy rumors. Sheikh Rashid's expression suggested confusion and mild offense. Pregnancy? Absolutely not. There was never any inappropriate relationship. She was my employee, nothing more. If she was pregnant, I knew nothing about it. Perhaps that's why she left, to hide pregnancy from family. His suggestion was calculated to redirect investigation away from him and toward the narrative of a promiscuous domestic worker fleeing consequences of her own poor choices. The police interviewed other staff. The butler confirmed Maricel had resigned suddenly. The chef barely remembered her. Domestic workers were beneath his attention. The driver had been off duty that evening. Only Dallasay might have provided contradictory testimony, but when police interviewed her, she said carefully, "Maricel told me she was leaving. Family emergency." She seemed upset but didn't explain details. "I helped her pack." Every word was lies, spoken by a woman who understood that telling truth meant becoming the next disappearance. Dallasay had survived 6 years in the Al-Mahmoud household by understanding what powerful families did to people who threatened them. Maricel's fate was a warning that Dallasay received clearly. With no body, no evidence of foul play, and consistent testimony from the household, Dubai police classified Maricel's disappearance as a missing person case rather than suspected homicide. The classification was significant. Missing persons received minimal investigative resources compared to active criminal cases. Essentially, the case was filed and forgotten. Faith Santos refused to accept this outcome. She contacted media outlets, human rights organizations, and Filipino migrant worker advocacy groups. Her story, "Pregnant Domestic Worker Vanishes After Confronting Wealthy Employer," gained traction in international media. CNN International ran a segment. BBC covered the story. Human Rights Watch issued a report citing Maricel's case as example of systemic abuse of domestic workers in UAE. The publicity created political pressure that Dubai authorities couldn't completely ignore. In January 2020, 2 months after Maricel's disappearance, Dubai police reopened the investigation with more senior detectives assigned. This second investigation uncovered details that the initial inquiry had missed or ignored. Digital forensics recovered Maricel's smashed backup phone from the Penthouse's trash chute system. Though destroyed, experts extracted partial data including the recording of her final message. They retrieved deleted security footage showing Maricel entering Sheikh Rashid's study at 8:04 p.m. on November 12, looking frightened but determined. More significantly, they discovered financial records showing that Sheikh Rashid had made unusual payments on November 12th and 13th, 150,000 dirhams to a private security company specializing in discrete problem resolution, and 75,000 dirhams to an industrial waste management firm with contracts for cleaning up hazardous material disposal. Investigators requested to interview the security contractors who'd been present that night. The company claimed both men had left UAE employment and returned to South Africa. Efforts to locate them internationally went nowhere. The names provided were likely aliases, and South African authorities showed little interest in pursuing investigation on behalf of a missing Filipina domestic worker. The waste management company's records showed a pickup from the Burj Khalifa on November 13th at 3:47 a.m., approximately 5 hours after Maricel's final message. The manifest listed carpet and damaged furnishings, totaling approximately 70 kilograms, the weight of an adult female. Where did the waste go? The company operated multiple disposal sites, including an industrial incinerator and several desert landfills. By the time investigators made these connections, 2 months had passed. Any biological evidence would have been destroyed or impossible to locate among hundreds of tons of waste. Investigators brought Sheikh Rashid in for formal questioning. He arrived with 3 lawyers representing one of Dubai's most powerful legal firms. The interview lasted 47 minutes and yielded nothing. Sheikh Rashid maintained his story. Maricel resigned, he paid her final wages. She left voluntarily. He knew nothing about pregnancy or foul play. When presented with the security company payment, his lawyers explained it as routine. The Al-Mahmoud family employed private security regularly for various properties. The payment timing was coincidental. The waste management payment? Renovation work in the penthouse required disposal of damaged materials. Nothing suspicious. The recovered voice message? Clearly Maricel was disturbed about something, probably personal issues unrelated to her employer. She'd fabricated a crisis to justify leaving her position. Every question had a prepared answer. Every piece of evidence had an alternative explanation. And underlying everything was the implicit threat. The Al-Mahmoud family had resources to make legal problems disappear, and investigators who push too hard might find their careers suffering unexpected complications. The investigation stalled. Without a body, without witnesses willing to testify, without physical evidence connecting Sheikh Rashid to Maricel's disappearance, prosecutors couldn't build a case that would survive the defense that wealth could purchase. In April 2020, Dubai police officially classified Maricel Evangelista as a voluntary disappearance. The investigation remained technically open but no longer actively pursued. The message was clear. A domestic worker's life wasn't worth jeopardizing diplomatic relations or bothering powerful families. But Faith Santos and Migrant. The international attention on Maricel's case created unexpected consequences that rippled far beyond one woman's disappearance. Faith Santos became a reluctant activist, her cousin's tragedy transforming her into voice for the thousands of domestic workers who suffered abuse, exploitation, and violence in silence. She started a social media campaign, #JusticeForMaricel. She posted photos of her cousin as a child in Pampanga, a teenager full of hope, a young woman who'd worked desperately to support her family. She shared Maricel's final voice message despite its painful content, letting the world hear a terrified woman's last words before vanishing. The campaign went viral. Domestic workers across Dubai and other Gulf states began sharing their own stories of abuse, sexual exploitation, unwanted pregnancies, and employers who wielded absolute power over their lives. The scope of the problem became impossible to ignore. An estimated 2.4 million domestic workers in Gulf states, predominantly female, predominantly from Philippines, Indonesia, Ethiopia, and South Asia, working under kafala sponsorship system that gave employers near-total control. Human rights organizations documented patterns eerily similar to Maricel's case. Domestic workers who got pregnant by employers, made demands for support or recognition, then disappeared without trace. Conservative estimates suggested dozens of such cases annually across the Gulf states. The real number was likely significantly higher, with many disappearances never reported because families assumed their loved ones had simply cut contact or run away. The Philippine government faced domestic pressure to take stronger stance on protecting its citizens working abroad. In June 2020, 7 months after Maricel's disappearance, the Philippines temporarily banned deployment of new domestic workers to Kuwait and threatened similar action against UAE unless working conditions improved. The threat carried economic weight. Filipino domestic workers were the most sought after in Gulf labor markets, and losing access to that labor pool would create immediate problems for wealthy families accustomed to their services. Under pressure, UAE authorities announced new protections for domestic workers. Mandatory rest days, limits on working hours, hotlines for reporting abuse, and critically, stipulations that employers couldn't confiscate workers' passports or prevent them from contacting their embassies. The reforms looked meaningful on paper. Implementation was another matter. The kafala system remained fundamentally unchanged, still granting employers extraordinary power over workers' legal status. And for women like Maricel who'd already disappeared into the system's darkest corners, reforms came too late. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mahmoud faced no criminal charges. His family's reputation suffered minor damage in international media, but domestically in UAE, the case reinforced existing power dynamics. Wealthy Emirati families could do whatever they wanted to foreign workers without meaningful consequences. However, the case created a split within the Al-Mahmoud family. Sheikh Rashid's father, increasingly concerned about international business relationships being damaged by the scandal, reportedly pressured his son to leave UAE temporarily until media attention subsided. In August 2020, Sheikh Rashid relocated to London, ostensibly to manage the family's European property investments. The move was effectively exile, but comfortable exile. A townhouse in Knightsbridge, continued access to family wealth, and distance from direct confrontation with Maricel's case. Dallasay, the housekeeper who'd witnessed Maricel's final hours, escaped the Al-Mahmoud household in September 2020. She contacted Faith Santos through encrypted channels, finally willing to provide testimony she'd been too frightened to share during official investigation. Her account was devastating. She described hearing Maricel's pleas for her life and her baby's life. She described the security contractors carrying what was clearly a body wrapped in carpet. She described the industrial cleaning of Maricel's quarters that erased every trace of her existence. Most significantly, she described a conversation she'd overheard between Sheikh Rashid and one of his brothers several days after Maricel's disappearance. They'd been speaking Arabic, assuming Dallasay didn't understand, but she'd learned enough during her years of service. "The problem has been resolved," Sheikh Rashid had said. "Completely. There's nothing left that could create complications." His brother had responded, "You need to be more careful. Father is furious about the international attention. Next time, handle it before they make demands. Next time." The phrase suggested that Maricel wasn't the first, wouldn't be the last, and that her disappearance was viewed as management failure rather than murder. Dallasay's testimony couldn't be used in UAE courts. She'd fled the country illegally, violating her employment contract, making her a fugitive whose credibility would be destroyed. But her account provided moral clarity that official investigation had avoided. Maricel Evangelista was murdered because she was pregnant and made demands that threatened her employer's reputation. Faith Santos used Dallasay's testimony to strengthen her advocacy work. She established the Maricel Evangelista Foundation, providing legal support, emergency assistance, and escape resources for domestic workers facing abuse in Gulf states. The foundation helped 127 women escape dangerous employment situations in its first year of operation. She also lobbied Philippine lawmakers to strengthen protections for overseas Filipino workers, including mandatory insurance policies covering repatriation and death benefits, and stronger requirements for host countries to investigate disappearances of Filipino nationals. Maricel's family never recovered from her loss. Her grandmother, who'd raised her, died 6 months after Maricel's disappearance, reportedly of heart failure but more accurately of grief. Her younger siblings, whose education Maricel had funded through her exploitation, carried crushing guilt about succeeding through her sacrifice. Her mother, still working in Hong Kong as domestic helper, blamed herself for encouraging her daughter into the same work that had ultimately killed her. For years later, Maricel's case remains officially unsolved. Dubai police maintain their classification of voluntary disappearance despite overwhelming evidence suggesting murder. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mahmoud has never been charged, has never faced meaningful consequences beyond temporary relocation to a different luxury city. The Burj Khalifa penthouse on the 148th floor has new occupants now. One of Sheikh Rashid's brothers moved in after the property sat vacant for several months following the scandal. The servants' quarters where Maricel lived and died have been renovated, all traces of her existence erased by marble and paint. But every Filipino domestic worker in Dubai knows Maricel's story. They share it in whispered conversations during their rare days off, teach it to new arrivals as cautionary tale about what happens when you forget your place in the hierarchy that values wealth above humanity. Her disappearance serves as warning and reminder. You are disposable. Your employer controls not just your working conditions but your survival. Getting pregnant, making demands, threatening exposure, these acts can be fatal. Accept abuse silently or risk becoming another missing person who vanishes into Dubai's perfect facade like she never existed. In Dubai's desert outskirts, where the city's gleaming towers fade into sand and heat, there are places that even Google Earth doesn't map clearly. Industrial zones where waste management trucks deliver payloads that get buried under meters of construction debris. Incinerators that run 24 hours processing material that wealthy families prefer to eliminate without questions. Maricel Evangelista's body is likely in one of these spaces, reduced to ash or buried so thoroughly that it will never be recovered. Her unborn child, the baby she'd carried with such desperate hope, was eliminated before it could complicate her employer's life with demands for acknowledgement or support. Faith Santos still maintains the #JusticeForMaricel campaign. For years later, she posts regularly to nearly 200,000 followers, keeping her cousin's story alive, refusing to let silence and time erase what happened. She posts Maricel's childhood photos, smiling in school uniform despite torn shoes. She posts the voice message periodically, that final desperate recording that captured a woman understanding she was about to die. She posts updates about the continuing investigation, which isn't actually continuing, and about the foundation's work helping other women escape situations that mirror her cousin's tragedy. Every November 12th, on the anniversary of Maricel's disappearance, Faith organizes vigils in Manila, Dubai, where Filipino workers gather quietly despite risk, and cities globally where migrant worker advocacy groups maintain presence. Participants light candles for Maricel and for the hundreds of other domestic workers who vanish annually into systems designed to make certain people disappear. The vigils are memorials but also protests. They demand investigation, accountability, justice that powerful families have avoided through wealth and influence. They insist that domestic workers' lives matter, that pregnancy isn't crime justifying murder, that women deserve protection regardless of nationality or economic status. Sheikh Al-Mahmoud returned to Dubai in 2022, the international attention having subsided enough that his presence no longer created immediate controversy. He married later that year, an Emirati woman from an equally prominent family, a union that cemented business alliances and produced the legitimate heirs his family expected. He doesn't discuss Maricel Evangelista. When journalists occasionally ask about the case, his lawyers issue standard responses. The matter was thoroughly investigated by authorities, he cooperated fully, he mourns the disappearance of a valued employee, but he had no involvement in whatever happened to her. The non-denial denials of someone who knows the truth but faces no legal obligation to speak it. The Al-Mahmoud family continues operating their real estate empire. The Burj Khalifa penthouse remains their property, a monument to wealth so extreme that human lives become rounding errors in the accounting of power. But every domestic worker who cleans those marble floors, who serves meals at the head table, who works in the servants' quarters knows what happened there. They know that Maricel made demands and disappeared. They know that pregnancy by your employer is death sentence if he decides you're inconvenient. They know that justice is luxury reserved for people whose passports aren't held hostage and whose visas aren't controlled by the very people abusing them. Somewhere in Manila, Maricel's younger siblings study at universities their sister's death funded. They carry guilt and grief in equal measure, understanding that their education was purchased with her life. They succeed academically, pursue careers, build futures their poverty-marked childhood suggested were impossible. But they do it knowing that every achievement is memorial to sister who sacrificed everything, who thought pregnancy might give her leverage for legitimacy, who learned too late that demanding humanity from men who view you as property is fatal miscalculation. Maricel Evangelista was 26 years old when she vanished. She'd worked as domestic helper for 7 years, sent home hundreds of thousands of pesos that transformed her family's circumstances. She'd endured sexual exploitation with the hope that compliance would eventually yield escape. Instead, she got pregnant, made demands, and ceased to exist. Her case remains open. Her body remains missing. Justice remains inaccessible. But her story survives, carried by advocates who refuse to let her death be meaningless, shared by domestic workers who understand they could be next, memorialized by organizations fighting to dismantle systems that make women like Maricel disposable. At 555 meters above Dubai, the Burj Khalifa's 148th floor penthouse continues hosting the wealthy and powerful. But if you listen carefully during quiet moments, some say you can hear echoes of a young woman's final pleas. Please, I don't want to die. My baby doesn't deserve this. Please. The building doesn't remember. The marble holds no traces. The powerful face no consequences. But those who knew Maricel remember. And in remembering, they resist the erasure that wealth and power demand. She was here. She lived. She loved her family. She dreamed of escape. And for demanding recognition of her humanity and her child's right to exist, she was murdered. Remember her name, Maricel Joy Evangelista. Remember her story. Share it with every domestic worker, every pregnant woman facing impossible choices, every family sending daughters abroad into systems that consume them. Subscribe to keep these stories visible. Comment to show algorithms that marginalized lives matter. Share to reach someone who needs to know the truth about Dubai's luxury built on invisible labor and disposable lives. Your engagement isn't just supporting content. It's refusing to let Maricel disappear twice, once from life, once from memory.